Joined GovTech in 2017 after 16 years in the United States. Young-boon was previously with Apple, where he was responsible for the design and development of the sensor module of the digital crown in the Apple Watch. Let's give our panelists a warm welcome. Lastly, we are glad to invite Karen Leong to be our moderator for this session. An entrepreneur herself, Karen is also an award-winning speaker, a champion for women's leadership, an influence and body language expert, and a regular feature on TV, radio, and print. She was on Channel News Asia analyzing the US 2016 presidential debates on live television. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Karen Leong. Without further ado, let us welcome our speakers and begin this session on leadership perspectives, innovation, and delivering maximum impact.
So very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You know, in the world of professional speaking, we call this the graveyard shift. You know, where the challenge is not learning, but staying awake. You know, so we're so happy to have all of you here. And you will stay awake for this session because we are tackling something very exciting. If you remember, we are at InnoFest. And so this session is spot on innovation. However, today's very diverse panel is going to give you a different take on innovation. Because as you know, not all innovation is good. Not all innovation leads to successful outcomes. And so what we're looking at today is to debunk some of the myths of innovation. And also, what we want is that at the end of this session, for you to walk away with some simple, actionable, yet transformational ideas that you can use to make innovation work for you. So let's lay the foundation, shall we? And because there are many different definitions of innovation. So I'm going to spark off the conversation by asking, how would you define innovation in a way that's effective for you? So why don't we start with this end, Young-boon?
Yeah. So for me, be the life in Apple or as an engineer or even as in the government, innovation has always been about solving a problem, right? Whether it's a technical problem or a people's problem, that's where you start. And then you need to have the passion to solve this problem. And only with the passion, then you can overcome all the obstacles that come and eventually, design something cool and good about it.
I think for me, innovation has always mean making a difference in people's life. Yeah, I think with that, because a lot of innovation could happen without impacting people's life. And, in order to, in a way, change the world, in a way, that, the innovation perspective of changing the world, you have to have something that ultimately brings positive impact to someone's life, or it could be something small or big, doesn't matter, yeah.
Right, so we talked about passion. So you want to take it on, meaning?
Sure. I take a rather simplistic view to innovation, right? Innovation is really about doing something differently and hopefully better than the way you used to do it before, right? And because of the very core, doing something differently, it entails risk for the person trying to implement it and for the organization trying to receive it. Okay, so I think that's where the crux of the whole debate actually rests.
So you've heard 3 definitions of innovation. But let's look at something also about the impact of innovation, shall we? Because, again, not all innovation is successful. And often we learn more from our failures and mistakes than the success cases. So I'm just going to ask the panel, what has been a mistake that your organization has made or that you have seen when they talk about innovation? So I'm just going to go to this end this time. Rajiv, would you like to take that on?
You want to put me on the spot for that question, huh? Actually, I'll tell you call it the mistake that we ended up correcting, and then where we applied it with one of my colleagues who's on stage, who came from Meraki. So very quickly, if people don't already know, Cisco is a very acquisitive company. We've bought more than 200 companies throughout our history, about 25 years. So we, you can imagine, have many lessons learned. And in recent years, our focus has been acquiring companies that have a software-based, SaaS-based model. That's not how Cisco grew its business. It was more traditional, selling solutions. And so many years ago, we bought a company called WebEx. It's still a successful #1 SaaS platform, meetings platform. And we tried to sort of force fit that into Cisco's model, which didn't work out well for a while. We saw that, we learned, we course corrected. And some of the lessons we applied in future actions, Meraki being one of our most successful acquisitions, was we didn't fully integrate them quickly. It's been a slow burn integration. And so that's kind of what I like about how we do it. Innovation is also about disrupting yourself, I think, and constantly learning and applying those learnings. So that's what we try to do here.
I mean, you use the word disruption, and it's often important to take a proactive look as well. So I would like to ask Sherilyn, because you are also somebody who has disrupted the industry. Would you like to share more about that?
Okay, so I guess to me, innovation is not so much about looking at what's disruptive all the time, but it's to look at how we can solve the problem with today's technology. So in today's environment where things are changing all the time, innovation is on a day-to-day basis. It's incremental. So even if you don't change your business, you're outdated already tomorrow. So the idea is not so much to look at how you can do something very drastic, but see how you can actually be relevant today. So give an example. This is like a really long time ago, about 15 years ago. So my first ever job was in a hotel. And this is a very nice business class hotel. And at that point in time when there were emails, there were SMSs, and they were really available very cheaply, hotels typically pass messages through the concierge, which was where I was at. And at the concierge, whenever someone wants to send a message to the guest, we'll print it out on a piece of paper, fold it up, put it into an envelope, and then have the bellboy deliver up to the room. By that time, when guests come back to the hotel, that message has already been outdated. So that actually doesn't solve the problem of passing on the message. But the hotels, typically at that point in time, because it was not looking at how they can use those days technology to solve their problem, they end up not actually solving the problem at all. So innovation, it's something that we really have to look at every day, and not so much so to create an impact, but to keep yourself relevant to today's technology.
So you could say that innovation is not just like a business impact, but often it also impacts the way we live. And what are your thoughts about that, James?
Well, look, I think everybody's called out a common theme here around problem solving. And I guess I see the same approach here. Innovation is really a toolkit that we can use to solve problems quickly and effectively. But I think in the context of failure, Innovate also allows us to essentially test ideas in an iterative fashion that allows us to quickly determine whether or not we're solving a problem effectively or, say, in a non-efficient manner. And allows us to then readjust and refine our approach in order to get an outcome that's deemed appropriate. Now, it's not always the technology stakeholder that provides input into that either. It can be the broader audience or the broader business that brings insights or views to the table that allow us to essentially go back and revisit approaches that we've taken to solve problems to begin with a view of essentially getting a better outcome. And I guess my last point around this is a process that doesn't change. It's a process that continually grows. And if I look at some of my time in the Meraki business, the Meraki business is a living and breathing software platform. Every single time I go in and use this platform, it changes. For a lot of people, they find that as a struggle. It's like, hang on, I did this way yesterday, but hang on, does it mean I have to do the same thing the same way today? Not necessarily. And I think everybody needs to become more comfortable with that so that we can essentially get the outcomes we're looking for faster, but also be not afraid to try new things.
And, this panel discussion, this conversation is not just limited to us here on the stage. More importantly, we want to make it about you and what's relevant. So we're going to open it early to the floor. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panel, please feel free to speak. But there is a question, actually, we've got on Slido, that we're going to start by addressing it first. So one person asked, how important is the culture of trust in regards to leadership innovation?
Could I take that, please? Okay. I like this question, okay, because let me first state up front. I have no affiliation to Cisco, all right? So I have no personal interest in promoting them or in short of them being on the panel. But I want to use them as an example, all right? This very issue, because this was a discussion I was having with James and with Rajiv earlier. And Cisco is a company that I admire a lot, right, in many different ways. So I started my life, I know if I tell you I'm 30 years old, all of you will believe it, but believe me, I'm here much longer than that. I've looked at companies since the 80s, 90s. So their space is a very interesting one, okay? A lot of their competitors in the 90s have now died. Some of you will remember companies like Lucent, Nortel, Nokia Networks, Ericsson. Some of you may not remember them, all right? These are large companies. In particular, Lucent was spun out of the Bell Labs. It was big parentage, but they're all dead today. And yet, Cisco is flourishing. Okay, I shouldn't use the word dead. I mean, struggling, going on. Cisco is flourishing in the industry, right? Why is that the case? If you look at how Cisco runs the company, it is exactly that, right? The issue of trust in changing the company. How do they keep pivoting? How do they keep refreshing the company? Cisco today is very different from the Cisco you see 20 years ago, okay? And to drill down one level, Cisco actually measures every year the level of trust in the organization. They do a trust survey for the whole organization in the US and in different parts of the world, where they allow the employees to freely voice and to freely feedback and to put into action what they are trying to espouse. So John Chambers and his team. So this is a very good example, I would say, of how a company this large, right, is able to create a safe environment where the people who are proposing that change and the company that's receiving it both feel safe and secure enough to allow for failures, to allow for, as what Rajiv mentioned earlier, pivots, right, to change. You try something, it doesn't work, let's try another way, right? And where people are not put down. And
Thank you, Roland. My money was well spent.
not even a coffee, I must say.
Okay, how many of you work in organizations where the CEO or the leaders of the company will have a support system and say, innovate, think of ideas that will transform or introduce innovation to your company? I mean, this question, how important the culture of trust in regards to leadership innovation? I myself, I think I would say most of us will be in a situation where the company will open up and let everybody, grassroots, everyone, to give suggestions of ideas on how to innovate or save money, sometimes certain processes in the company. And I remember about 8 years ago when I was in this big organization, they have a huge rollout, spent a lot of money, I think getting some consultants in to try to instill innovative mindset in a lot of us. And me being, they call it on the ball, I think I submitted like 8 or 10 suggestions on how I can improve the company. But what happened is I realized that they have this system where all these 8 suggestions will be locked, and then my boss will have to look at one by one and give a report on it. Yeah, and what happened was I do have a chat with my boss. He said, hey, you come. And he said, whatever you are doing right there, innovating, it's not working. That's not your core job. I remember. So with the good intention of the leaders wanting to introduce that, but I think the trust of the middle management and trust that if you give me the time, I will be able to do it, because I actually don't have the time. So I was staying late to think of ideas to write statements about it. So if you give me 30% of my working time, trust that I will be doing what you think I would do, like open up. And then my boss probably wouldn't have that chat with me because I'm giving him extra work. Yeah, so it's just a very young.
So trust is such a powerful asset, and we talk about team psychological safety. That's also crucial. Young Boon, I'm sure you have some more thoughts to add to that.
So I was just going to make things difficult for her. So if you are so passionate about your ideas, so what is the extra time after work? It's no big deal, right? If you don't believe in spending the extra time to try out your ideas, then why should your manager invest in you?
No, I am investing the time, but what happened is that because with that, he's deemed that I'm not focusing or interested in my core job. But I mean, it's the trust that why are you, because my late hours could be spent in my core job as well. He would prefer that. Yeah, that is the chat about. Yeah.
Okay, so you have a bad manager, I see. Now, so I think in the engineering environment, we are allowed to do whatever we want. So basically, at least in my previous company, as well as the group that I'm managing now, I let my guys do whatever they want. They come to me with an idea, and basically the default answer is always yes, go do whatever you want. If you need resources, as long as within my means, go ahead and try it out. Because I think that the world has evolved now that people are really smart now. They don't need me to micromanage. They don't need me to tell them exactly what they need to do. So it's better to let them explore what's the best way to get things done. And then if somehow my job is just to make sure that they are not steering too far away or doing something that is against company policy or whatever, or not doing their core job, you see. Then as long as they don't steer away too far from that, I think the idea is let them run, let them be flexible. Yeah, I think that is the culture of the engineering world now.
No, I'm also just curious. It's nice to say I'm going to let my guys do whatever they want. So why don't we pose the question to the Cisco guys, shall we? How do you let the guys do whatever they want, but yet still ensure that the results are achieved? So, any thoughts, James or Rajiv?
Go ahead, and I'll add later.
Okay, no worries. Look, I think that's a great question. Ultimately, we all need to get results. And I think we have a different tool set to kind of get us there this time, but we also need license to try, to fail, and also succeed as well. So I think what we kind of do today in Cisco is obviously we still need to have execute on the essentially base need that our role fulfills, but we also have the flexibility to essentially spend some time trying to solve, say, customer problems uniquely. I'll give you an example that I've been doing at the moment is I had a customer come to me with a really weird incident response problem that they had. And essentially I thought, well, I've got some part of the solution, but I don't have the whole solution for the customer. What other things, say, outside a system could I use that might be from the tech realm or even from, say, a business operations or technical operations realm that could help me kind of solve that problem? So we essentially draw from a wide range of tools, and this example essentially leveraged APIs. Now I'm sure that's a common topic that comes up in many of your day-to-day lives, and I still think there's a fear around what APIs mean to the industry, what they can bring for us. But essentially by looking at these options that we have, or the tools that we have, I was able to actually take different functions, tie them together to actually achieve an outcome that was not only appropriate for the customer, but actually gave them additional value. And to this point, these are things that are supported essentially in Cisco on a day-to-day basis, so we can continue to evolve, develop, and essentially innovate and change. And what we do is share these learnings. Again, we have different perspectives on the same problems from all different stakeholders across the business that we look to share, communicate, and we even now build communities whereby some ideas, that might be typically hard to achieve for one person, but maybe not so hard for someone else. Can be cross-shared across the broader community, so we can actually all add and contribute to the learnings, and the outcome for that is customers have a better ability to achieve their outcomes, whether they're unique or whether they're aligned to, say, a typical ask of a technology platform over time.
Maybe I'll answer that in a couple of different ways, Karen. One is that, look, candidly, I feel like we have an unfair advantage because while I agree that innovation has in some ways become sort of an abused word, we've been doing it for 25 years. So the way we think about innovation is build. We've got a $6 billion R&D budget. Buy. We bought more than 200 companies. Invest. We deploy about $200 million a year in startups. And on top of that, money in sort of venture fund investments, etc. Partner, we're a very partnership-focused organization. 95, 96% of Cisco's $50 billion revenue goes through partners. And then we have other strategic partnerships like the one with Apple, Ericsson, etc. And co-develop. That's our view of innovation. And we've been doing it for 25 years. So we've got lots of lessons, etc. I could say so much about that question, given that perspective, because we've got such long history, but it's really an organization that is built around a culture where we don't just believe we do our own. The only cool innovation is what we develop. There's a lot of cool innovation happening outside, and we embrace that in all of those ways. I want to just quickly react to the question about how does the leader create a culture of innovation? There was a question earlier that I saw through the scroll. Where do you start? What's the practical first step?
Yes, with limited budgets.
With
yes,
limited
somebody
budgets.
asked.
What I want to say is, firstly, you have to be clear about why you want to innovate. What is it? You have to be very clear about what goal, what concern. I agree innovation is about problem solving, but I also think it's about disruption is also a little bit abused word, but it's about disrupting yourself, right? The innovator's dilemma. So thank you, again, jokes aside for the compliments, but I actually honestly think I like to study organizations, and Cisco is a very interesting case study because IBM, the famous, elephants can't dance, what Lou Gerstner did with the company, they had to reinvent themselves because they were on the brink of bankruptcy. Cisco decided to disrupt itself while it had $40 billion in the bank. And we did that because we knew that if we continued to do what we were doing with the business model, perhaps we wouldn't have the $40 billion 10 years out. And we've disrupted ourselves and grown that $40 to $70 billion in the bank, and we are significantly disrupting ourselves. So I think you have to be clear about what it is that you are either concerned about or you want to go off and achieve. And then you, I think, have to think the next level about and make innovation specific. Show results to employees. They can be simple goals, but if you just keep talking innovation and show me a big idea and I'll react to it, I don't think you'll go too far. You have to make it very tangible and very specific. Don't try to solve 10 problems, solve one problem. And then you'll see when people see that you mean it, then it takes on within the organization.
I think it goes very aligned with disrupt yourself, which means no matter what stage you are in the organization, you can start innovating. And that brings another question that quite a number of people also favorited, that innovation is happening today, but at different pace across organizations, across regions and industries. So we're going to ask the panel to look at a crystal ball. So which are the industries you think that will change drastically in the next few years? And any thoughts, Sherilyn?
So I am actually not a lawyer by training. So imagine I started Asia Law Network with the aim of helping people to find lawyers, right? And just a simple tool that we did was to automate the way people find lawyers, because it's so difficult. When you're sick, you can go and see a doctor. Just go down the street and you go to a GP, but you cannot do that with a lawyer. And we all live under the law, especially in all civilized, worlds, right? And law is something that is vital to all of us. Yet, to find help in legal is so difficult. So as much as, everyone thinks that in law, it's the slowest moving industry. In the next few years, I actually see that it's going to be the fastest moving, because we're really at the cusp of innovation in law. It's like the countries that are moving from 2G to 4G. You realize the law firms will undergo this tremendous change where they either jump across that chasm, they fall into the chasm, or they actually manage to save themselves from destruction and ask me for faxes. You cannot imagine when I go and pitch the idea to law firms, they will ask me for fax number because they wanted me to fax my proposal over. And that's actually how backward some of the law firms are. But this is a very interesting time for law, and actually I believe that it's going to be one of the most exciting industry that's to come in the next few years.
And I'm going to ask Xan also, because the FinTech industry, Bitcoin, there is a lot happening here. So what are your thoughts?
Okay, to actually, the question is which industry will change drastically in the next few years? I don't look at industry because I believe in technology-enabled schizophrenia. you are not who you are, right? Suddenly a transport company is now a venture fund.
Yes.
A transport company is a payment wallet as well. So some VC I know become data collection because they don't care about how much, whether they make money, just want the data from the country. So what I'm thinking about is the changes that will, I think echoing what Anthony Tan said yesterday, is Southeast Asia will see a lot of changes because with blockchain technology in terms of making the little guy prosper, because costs in payments, wallet space has come down a lot because of the technology. And it's the barrier of entry to several industry. It could be insurtech as well, insurance, insuring crowd. So crowd premium is going to drop. For example, that's one space. Even audit, accounting, among all the professional services. And of course, talk about banking, because when you think about it, you need to make payments. You don't really need a bank account, especially when you talk about 50% or 500 million of people around Southeast Asia do not have a bank account. And with a lot of payment services, wallet, even just example of WeChat, and the time compression of how Alibaba has rolled out all these products. So I would say that not just industries, but the whole of Southeast Asia will see dramatic changes in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah.
And Young Boon, what are your thoughts again from the government perspective?
So I'm going to throw out something not really answering the question, but relevant to the question. I think I'll talk a little bit about the autonomous vehicles industry. I think that will be top of everybody's mind that, it's going to be the next big thing, right? It's going to change drastically. So on one hand, it is true that technology has come to the point where because of sensors and IoT, because of AI, because of machine learning, technology has definitely come to a point where the cars can definitely drive better than humans. Okay? If you put it onto a racetrack, you'll run faster than any humans that can do it. But unfortunately, to see autonomous vehicle actually running on a real street, I believe it's going to be at least 15, 20 years. That's not because of the technology. It's because of the human and the cultural acceptance of it. Firstly, I feel that, the cars can move, but then there's a lot of interaction with humans. And humans by nature is unpredictable. So how can you design an algorithm to predict the unpredictable, right? So I have Mercedes and some companies actually presented and they actually shared that, in a controlled environment, in a racetrack, in a very good weather, the cars will run better than humans. But if you put the same car in the streets of Shanghai or in Orchard Road, it will be stuck at the zebra crossing for 8 hours a day. Because people will be crossing, people will be looking at a car and like, okay, if you program it to be conservative, the car will just wait for you to react and the person will look at it and will just keep crossing, and nothing will happen. So the car will be stuck there forever. So I truly believe that to have autonomous vehicles on the streets, we must be willing to give up driving our own cars. So it'll be at least one generation before we can do that.
Just a quick comment to add to that. So I agree that it's more technology that will impact multiple industries, but the one I was going to highlight was also kind of the automobile industry. And just to add to what you said, the way I think about it personally is that I think people tend to jump to fully autonomous and driverless from what we are today. I think we're going to first see a significant transition to highly connected vehicles, which are still driven by humans. And then the autonomous comes. The change is going to be simultaneous, but in my mind, people jump to the other when I think you're going to see a lot of that transition first, more visibly, and then the autonomous.
So the problem with connected infrastructure, that's where the problem is. So all the vehicles out there, they all designed with their own internal sensors. They do not, although infrastructure sensors are available, they do not use that. And what's the reason behind it? It's because of cybersecurity issues. Right? It's too easy to spoof the data from the lamppost or from a traffic light. And if all the BMW cars relies on external sensors, if somebody hacked their system and say, well, at this moment of the time, every single car turns left, it's going to cause a lot of havoc. So right now, what they're telling me is that there's zero dependency on external sensors at all.
So I mean, this is a really interesting debate in terms of like, how do you then spearhead innovation again beyond industries, and this is quite a structural issue. And again, I'm just going to highlight one of the questions where we talk about, it's not just the domain of governments or large organizations. Sorry, this one. Yeah, where people often associate innovation, they look to the startup. But how do huge organizations innovate and break out of their own paradigm? So we have, some of you I think in the panel has had experience both being in the startup as well as in large organizations. So I'm going to ask, would you like to take it on? Roland.
Okay, so I used to work in an organization that had 250,000 people, 150 countries around the world, right? So now I'm working with a group of startups. We're a venture capital firm, okay? So we have investments in over 150 startups all around the world, Israel, some in Singapore, in the US. And one of the things that we do is we help large organizations. We consult with over 100 MNCs around the world, and we help them deploy innovation in their environments, okay? So some of these, so I've seen how large organizations struggle with having innovation come internally, because if you think about it, one of the challenges is you need a sponsor for whatever change you want to implement, right? And there is a lot of career risk involved with trying to sponsor a change. And I think organizations realize that. So some of the organizations that we deal with, they prefer to have an external party come in, validate some of these things, and come in and implement for them. And so it's also a bit of a career shield, for the managers, the senior managers who are willing to sponsor these things. Now, I think that's the very rudimentary step. That's a necessary step for large organizations who are initially afraid to take that risk. But the most forward-thinking organizations, and I'll again cite Cisco as an example, and also some other ones, which have their own corporate innovation arms, right? Their own corporate innovation arms. They have now even their own corporate VC setups and everything to drive that change themselves. Because if you drill right down to it, no one's going to understand your organization better than you. And back to Rajiv's point about Christian Claytonson's innovator's dilemma. So that's the point I disagree with Christian, where he says large organizations will never be able to disrupt themselves. And I think several companies have already shown that they can. So it is essentially, and how does a large organization do it? It needs very senior management buy-in. It needs to be led from the top. I think some of the questions also pointed out to friction within the industry where things get stopped in the middle. Zen talked about it, where a middle manager stops the process of innovation. Because you must understand the alignment of interest. Humans are very basic creatures. Okay? It's always self-interest. Is it in my self-interest to promote this change? What are the risks associated with it? Right? There are many different routes to achieving a success, but it entails risk. So if you're going to do things differently, if you're going to disrupt yourself, you have to take a risk. And oftentimes, it has to be led by the top. If the senior managers are not willing to do that, if they're looking for someone in the middle to take that risk, the organization is not going to move. But if you are running a large organization and you are afraid to take that risk, start with having a third party come in and help you. Right? Third party come in and help you implement that, bring in some changes, looking at your systems, be a bit, and try it out. And if it fails, just blame them. Right? If it works, take credit for it and move on and start your own.
No, that's why people like us have jobs. we're often engaged by MNCs to do transformation and change management projects, and we tell the guys, trust us, you guys relax, let us help to make life easy. And Zen, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think to continue what Roland said about some within the company, large organization, they're setting out like FinTech Hub, for example. And I was in this conference just a few months ago, and one of the head of a FinTech Hub of a huge bank in Singapore were talking about it is not in his benefit or habit to think about what will happen in 50, 100 years' time. He said, quote, I'm told to do what I'm to do, so I will only think 1 to 2 years. Even 5 years is a long time. But he is the head of a FinTech Hub. So to me that was, and he said in public, so to me it was like, wow. But coming back to this, I want to say an example which I feel very strong about is, who has heard of M-Pesa? Right, M-Pesa, which is the money, or not money, it's a minutes, prepaid card minute. So it is, M-Pesa is a company that you allow people to transfer minutes, and you can go to Kenya and say, buy a cup of coffee for 2 minutes. So in 10 years, they have 25 million customers. KCB Bank is the biggest bank in Kenya. They only have 7 million customers in 120 years. So when you think about that, what is the difference? So I'm very curious, so I actually read a bit about it as a case study myself. And the answer was, M-Pesa was managed to be successful because the focus was not in making money. So when you, especially big organization, when they focus in terms of time length, if you need to make in 3 years' time this amount ROI in this certain project, maybe, not all the time, sometimes it becomes a barrier to innovate. So because they don't have to, it's Vodafone had that project at M-Pesa, because they don't have to make money, it was an added service. But because they allow people to do transfer of minutes, in just a few months they have $1 million coming in. Just like Starbucks, Starbucks became one of the most successful banks, they call it, because they have $1.3 billion cash from their prepaid cards. So again, technology enabled schizophrenia. Starbucks is one of the most successful banks, when you think about it.
And it's good, you answered one of the questions as well, If you have a focus, not just on making money, but innovation to solve problems or a social cause, is that still profitable? Absolutely.
So I was just going to add to that. I think it's an interesting question that's been upvoted here, and that is really how do we actually get businesses involved in this sort of change? And I think what some businesses, especially who are scared about, I guess, impacting their existing value that they offer to the market, is to find something that may be associated with something like automation and say, orchestration of a process, and essentially re-engineer the process for that, but use innovative tools to actually achieve that. Because what that does is allow essentially a business to learn first, start to refine an approach that's, I guess, becomes more comfortable over time, and then essentially you can actually extend that into problems that are, I guess, more complex or more difficult. But that then actually drives you forward rather than essentially having you essentially sitting there, spinning wheels, not actually achieving any real change. And that's also a great way of people becoming comfortable with change, because ultimately innovation does impact via change, and that's often something that doesn't sit great with everybody, whether it be some of the points that were called out before. Well, hang on, is this going to impact what I do on a day-to-day basis? Whether we like it or not, these functions are going to change and they will impact us. But we have two choices. We can either fight it, which isn't really going to help us all move forward, or we can embrace it, and I think remove that fear. And the fear is often just they're due to lack of understanding or lack of, wanting to do something in a different way.
And it's quite interesting. A lot of the conversations about creating a culture of innovation is from 30,000 feet high, which is the leader level. But what if, and that's also one of the questions that's asked, what if the organization doesn't have a culture of trust, doesn't have a culture of innovation? What can you as an employee, and you're not a leader, do to spark an action, or to take up a conversation of innovation with your superior? Now, who would like to take this on?
I think you should quit the organization.
That's always on the table.
Can I jump into that? Yeah. So I guess, I actually do agree that you just have to either quit the environment that you're in or before quitting, please try to make a difference first. So it often boils down to an individual in the company. We realize, through some of my experiences, that you always need someone who's able to show the others it's safe to do something different. And if that person gets away with doing something different, over a long period of time, others will actually follow. And then, so you got to be that lone crazy person dancing first, and then find the second one. So find a friend to join you if you're trying to actually, fight for something. And if that goes through, actually, then you'll have a whole band of people who are willing to do something different out of the box in the organization. But I think, as we were talking about like leadership earlier, it's interesting how a lot of leaders don't make themselves available. So I'm just tying it back to the question that we had earlier, right? The traditional business leader, I always reflect myself and call myself traditional because I've basically run organizations that are very, in the traditional sense of the word, traditional businesses. So give an example. When I was 26, I actually bought into a creative agency that was making losses for the last 2 years. And the only thing I had to do to change the industry, the company from loss-making to money-making was actually to change the culture within. And all I did was to sit in a place where every single employee could speak to me and tell me their problems for 3 months. And after 3 months, I know exactly what's happening inside out, and I knew exactly what next steps to take. And I know it sounds like a big word, right, in terms of like leadership and innovation. A lot of it is actually accessibility to the people who can make the changes. And that's why we came back to defining the problem. So if you can really define the problem, you actually don't need to spend a cent on innovation. So that's why, given a limited budget, all you need to do is to listen and to be accessible. So don't sit in the office, sit outside, in the cafeteria all day. I'm sure, give it 1 week, right? You'll be able to see what changes you need to make your organization a better place.
No, it's true. One key leadership skill is shut up and listen. When you do that, you quieten your mind and you actually ask questions, you'd be amazed at the kind of insights that you get. And that ties in with also a very popular question. So now, if you put on the manager hat, how do you then inculcate an innovative mindset? Especially when you have long-time employees who are very resistant to change. Now, any ideas, the Cisco guys?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of different perspectives here. I know the problem that's being highlighted here. This is we do things a certain way here and all of that, and a fear of all kinds of things. But I think we also have to recognize some practical realities, which is a lot of senior leaders are not incentivized. The way incentive systems work, even for senior leaders and middle management, is to deliver numbers, as an example. And there is a practical reality, and I see that if I were in that role, I would make a very pragmatic choice and say, that's what I have to deliver for, that's what the organization, my shareholders expect from me. So I think you have to recognize that reality. It's not, oftentimes I don't think people are putting necessarily blinders on or being bad or something like that. A lot of times it is those realities that get in the way. Therefore, I think that creating a true culture has to be top-down. The example you gave, Sherilyn, sounds like you were kind of at the top of the house and you could do that. And I really think you have to start at the top. And it has to be a cross-organizational, cross-process, multidisciplinary set of changes that you do that complement each other, from how you're incentivizing, from how you're incorporating in innovation, how you're creating that culture where you tell people, ground up, and showing that you're really serious about it, showing the results that I was talking about. I think that's how you do it. You can't do innovation piecemeal. You can't wake up one day and say, oh, I got to be innovative, and do one thing and expect that gets you results. So
I want to add on to what you say. I think that is the word that's very close to innovation that hasn't been mentioned so far. It's fear. I think fear is just next to innovation. Just give you an example. One of a group of a society actually sort of hired me to talk about blockchain technology. And the whole reason was, what's your objective? I asked them. They said, is it for them to learn about blockchain technology? He said, no. Your main objective is to instill fear. I said, okay, got it. So what I did, so it was a 6-hour workshop. I talked about blockchain technology for 2 hours. For the first part of the day, I was talking about how Kodak disappeared. We think about Kodak, it's quite a sad story because they invented digital photography, which in the end killed them. Am I right? The employee invented it, but they kept it. So, and then the first half was just really nothing about blockchain. During the break, I have half of the attendants or the participants came to me. Can you share with me more about blockchain technology? I really want to know. How does it impact my industry? So I thought at that time that senior management got it. Fear was the first word that we have to probably talk about.
And interestingly, Kodak's share price is going to the roof because they're rebranding as a blockchain company.
I was just going to add a great example. in the Cisco context. If you look at the acquisition of the Meraki business into Cisco, that provided, a set of innovations that was very unique and new to the Cisco business. And that essentially, was met with some, resistance to change, not only at the top level of the business, and that took some time to understand, but also down where I spent a lot of my time working with the engineers that actually build solutions for customers. And it wasn't that it wasn't able to, address a need. It was actually, there was a lack of understanding, or was a lack of how does this particular approach solve problems for my customer. So it was really about us, and this is part of the role of the broader business, to educate our peers, show them how how to actually solve this problem in a different way. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way to do it, but the number one thing is we need to work with our customers to work out how do they want to solve their problem, and how do we apply the right tool set to get them to where they want to go. And the key message was that needs to be paramount in every decision that we make. How do we get the customer to where they want to go? But that fear piece comes back in again, time and time again. Education definitely helps to get rid of that fear, and it's a continual process that we need to drive.
And yes.
So I'll just take this opportunity to do some shameless promotion for the government. So one thing good about, one of the reasons why I left Apple and TI to join the government is that we no longer have to worry about numbers. We don't do anything for numbers. We are not a P&L company. We don't care about profits, revenue. And all we care about is, how are we going to make the people's lives better? And for that, I allow my guys to try whatever they want, as long as they can prove to me that what they are doing, can impact the people's life. And of course, we have goals to meet. And also in GovTech, our policy is, we always start small, but we think big, and then we have to act fast. So I tell my guys, whatever you want to do, you have a good idea, but you have to show me a little bit of results first. You don't have to implement for the entire country, but do it for, say, 5 people, and show me that it improves their lives.
Hey, just on that, so the revenue piece I gave, or the sales numbers, was an example. I'm actually fairly close to the government thinking here. I've spent time with the government. The point was you have to be very goal-oriented, which the government here is, and that's the point.
Yeah,
the revenue example was just an example. The point is you have to align the incentives, and the goals have to be aligned for you to successfully ultimately embrace a culture of innovation. Because if they're not aligned, I don't think you will be able to embrace it just by talking about it.
Yeah, so essentially, people need to see the value of taking action to be innovative first for themselves, for their personal goals, then it's aligned to organizations.
What I'm saying is, before the value, you have to know what the goal is. People have to be aligned around the goal, and then you ideally show results along the way, and then they begin to get the value, and then becomes a feedback loop. Because culture is about being not somebody just talking about it and, around the coffee machine, but everybody has to feel that. And that's how you get it, I think.
So I also agree that the culture of innovation has to start from the top. Yeah, part of the reasons for me agreeing to the job is also because there's promise from the top that they want innovation, they want change. If not, I will also be fearful about joining, but
So in terms of encouraging teams, when you see an action that you think is innovative, and you realize that is the kind of attitude you want in the team, you have to reward that person, or actually state it that, hey, that's actually really good. So small wins are very important. I realize if you're trying to change an organization, it all starts with small wins, really small wins.
So fear and reward, 2 very powerful emotions.
Yeah, about rewarding, on the point of rewarding, I think we have to change a bit of mindset as well to reward people for mistakes. Because when you innovate, you are sure bound to fail, sure bound. And then if right now a lot of mindset that we have is, just like I have a mentor when I first started work. He said, Zen, most important thing when you start work is to do as little as possible. I say, why? Because he said, you will be penalized for making mistakes. How not to make mistakes? Do as little as possible. Which for the first few years, because, again, I'm very on the ball. So I realized, I thought there's some brilliance to his, but then later on, I do realize what that will do for innovation for a company. And we have to change our mindset to allow, I myself was very difficult and I make a lot of mistakes in my adult life, but I am a brilliant student, like perfect A. So when I started being an entrepreneur, the most difficult thing for me, besides finding money, is actually to allow myself to make mistakes. And I think leaders allow ourselves to make mistakes. Yep.
No, it's great because if we reward people for making mistakes, we're actually rewarding them for taking action, regardless of the results. I mean, it brings to mind Google's failure parties, where they celebrate failure, but it allows people to actually fail early and fail fast, saving them money in the long term. And interestingly, there's a Cisco-specific question here, which states that laws and regulatory frameworks of various countries may not evolve fast enough. So do you see organizations like Cisco doing cutting-edge work, working with governments on law? James and Rajiv?
Yeah, I'm certainly not from our legal team, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but at a high level, I can say that we do have very strong relationships with the Singapore government as an example, and governments around the region. And I can offer a slightly broader regional perspective as well, going to Australia, India, etc. And I'd say, yeah, we work with the government. We see across a variety of areas, and in the context of startups and innovation and all of that, yeah, we'll participate with them and share our views of what has to evolve for it to become a more robust ecosystem. So that's it.
And I think I guess if I look at it in a Meraki context, obviously we deal in a global market and there's various legislative requirements that we need to address in those markets. What we do is we actually look to evolve and meet those needs, but also then look to share those across essentially the broader footprint that we deploy our services upon. So it actually essentially brings everybody along, even though the legislation might be mandated in a particular region, like the EU, for instance.
No, I'm just going to ask, does anybody have a question? Because we have had so many good questions here. Who would like to ask a question directly to the panel? Yes, please.
Hi, my question is based on Sharon's point earlier, but all of yours as well. Laws and regulatory frameworks aren't evolving fast enough. They probably won't. Do you see organizations doing cutting-edge work, like all of your organizations, working with governments to help them?
Just from observation and what we see across the region, laws are definitely lagging behind in terms of how they're catching up with all the improvements and innovation and all the technologies out there. But one thing that we see a lot is the countries that are actively having a conversation with technology partners and technology creators are the ones that move faster. And it's important, if you're here and you're creating anything, to actually engage in those conversations as early as you can. For example, even before we started the platform, we have already consulted with all the regulatory bodies to make sure that we're not doing anything that they are not aware of. And it's always there's a fear, right? Not just in terms of the person that's creating the technology or the innovation, but also how responsible are we to the people that we're serving. Because if you're creating a technology that's used by all, then definitely you need to have the open conversation with the people who are taking care of the people. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask whether there are any other questions first within this time that we have. Anyone from the back? Right, I know, that's why this is so active. So there is a specific question on the construction industry. How many of you are working in the construction industry? Because the question is, why do you think the construction industry is lagging behind in terms of innovation? Now, who would like to take on?
I used to be in real estate development. One of the key, I think, the real reason is because a major construction company, which in US or in Australia, are unionized. So because of that, I think sometimes it's very hard to introduce. And I think the point about law earlier, what I like about Singapore as a smart nation, is how collaborative some of our regulators are. We have conversations after conversation and round tables with organization, non-profit organization, the voice from the grassroots. I really like that part of it, and I don't think I see that in many countries.
Right.
Yeah.
So very briefly, there's question on government and question on construction industry, and basically the government is definitely working very closely with the industry, including Cisco, as well as a lot of other companies like IBM or Microsoft or even Apple, all to ensure that new technologies are being incorporated into our future laws and all this. There's a lot of interaction with them. I have a lot of visits every week from different companies, pitching their ideas, and there's a lot of meetings for us to try to understand and come to an understanding and come to an agreement on certain laws and all this. Say based on the construction industry, the building BCA, which is Building Construction Association in Singapore, they are also looking at digitizing their practices, innovation in the construction practices. Like they come to us and ask, can we use sensor and IoT to try to improve the safety conditions of the construction sites, as well as maybe improve the efficiency. So there's definitely a lot of efforts going on in that.
So we have time for one final question, if there is anyone. If not, then I'll ask the panel, because just to wrap up this session, if you guys could just share one final thought on how do you spark innovation, whether it's professionally or personally. Or to make it easier, just to wrap up, because we've covered so many different angles today. And if you had to just give, what is one last word that you want to share with the audience? If you sum it up in 1 to 2 sentences.
All right, I'll start. I'll basically find something you're passionate about, explore it, understand the options, as to how you can actually integrate or execute on that passion, and test. Don't be afraid to fail. Doesn't have to be formal. You can do it behind the scenes, but give it a go. And essentially, it's something I look to try and do every day. I win some, I lose some, right? The thing is, but I'm not afraid to lose. So I guess that's my key takeaway.
For me, it's always about asking myself, before I come to any conclusion. For example, I say, hey, plan A is a better plan. I will ask myself, why is that so? Is there any other ways to do it? And if I think it's a better plan, do I have data to back it up? That means, have I tested it and actually shown that it's workable? And I do that with everyone in my team. So if they want to suggest something new, they just have to prove that, using data, that it's workable. And who am I to say whether it's not workable, right? Because, it's tested and data-driven.
Roger.
So a couple of things. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that I have been, as you alluded, I have been a founder. I've gone through the whole journey, raising institutional money, selling the company, etc. So I speak, whatever I say, whatever advice I give comes from both perspectives of being in a large company and that. So I don't know what the mix of startups in the audience is versus people in large organizations who are keen to innovate. But, other than what was just said, I would say looking at sort of the number of questions and the type of questions, don't be reluctant to reach out and find advisors or mentors who've done it. I don't think you'll find all the answers. Hopefully we've helped you, but I don't think you'll find all the answers you're looking for in an hour session. So find people who've done it, who understand, and you'll be surprised how many people are willing to spend some time with you to just kind of give you the advice you're looking for.
Great. So we're just going to ask you again, just one sentence. What are your final thoughts?
I think it's quite clear from the panel that if you're a senior leader, the imperative is upon you, the onus is upon you to spark that change, right? However, I'd like to just end up with a word. If you are lower down in your career right now, if you're earlier in your career, I would just give you this piece of advice, okay? I'm not young anymore. If you are, you have something I don't. Now, the environment today has never been more better for you to try to do something, all right? The risk reward has never been lower. The traditional hierarchical organization is breaking down, all right? So if I were you, if I were 25 today, I would just give it a shot. Go, if my boss doesn't listen, there are other bosses who will, right? There are many different ways to the top, and it's not going through the old path that people like us used to take. So give it a shot, try. You never know what may happen.
So try. Suzanne, one word.
Question. I think it's not about providing answers. A lot of time is asking the right questions. How can I do it better? I use that same thing on my children. I ask them questions to make them better themselves. So I do it on myself too.
Very good.
So basically, it doesn't have to be the cutting edge technology as long as you solve the problem. So if you're interested, check out My Responder app. It's basically traditionally, the fireman has to travel to someone with a heart attack, but they couldn't get there in time. So how did the government help? We created an app that allows people to volunteer, and basically now, if somebody has a heart attack, you get pinged, and the nearest person can go help, and it's much faster than a fire engine trying to get through all the traffic in Singapore.
Thank you so much. Firstly, can you join me in thanking the panel for such a stimulating conversation? Thank you. And most of all, we would also like to sincerely thank you for being here, participating with us, and asking the questions. I just thought of just summing up in 3 words. The biggest takeaway for me was number 1, passion. Number 2, listen. And number 3, don't stop questioning and acting, no matter how small it is. Thank you again. You've been an amazing audience. Have a lovely afternoon.